Senator Don Humason represents 11 communities in western Massachusetts: Agawam, Southwick, Granville, Tolland, Russell, Montgomery, Westfield, Southampton, Easthampton, parts of Chicopee, and all of Holyoke in the Massachusetts State Senate. He also serves as the Assistant Minority Leader. Senator Humason was first elected to the Senate in 2013 in a special election to succeed Senator Mike Knapik. He was re-elected in 2014 to his first full year to term, and he is currently serving his third full term in the state Senate. Don was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2002 and represented the city of Westfield for 5 terms before being elected to the Senate. Prior to that, he served as the Director of Legislative Affairs of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in Boston. Don was also a trial court security officer in Westfield District Court and a respite counselor at the Crisis and Transitional Respite of Westfield Area Mental Health. He is a 1989 graduate of Westfield State College and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Criminal Justice with minors in Spanish and Psychology. He is married to Janice Tracy Humason, and they have a son named Quinn. The senator is also an avid photographer, never missing the opportunity to capture fun things and beautiful things, panoramic views, and his son's face. We are pleased to have him on today's program. Welcome. Today we're speaking with Senator Don Humason, Republican of Westfield, and our journalists are Mike Plaisance, a longtime journalist, and Manuel Frau Ramos, publisher of El Sol Latino. Thank you, Senator Humason, for being with us today. Mike Plaisance has the first question.
Senator, how are you?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good. I wanted to ask you what it's like being a Republican in the state of Massachusetts. You're in the House for 5 terms. You're in your 3rd term in the Senate. That means that at least the voters in the district feel that you're effective in getting stuff done. Specifically, how are you able to be effective being a Republican in a Democrat-controlled state?
Well, it's a good question because there's so few of us, right? And in the Massachusetts Senate, there's 40 members. 34 of them are Democrats. 6 of us are Republicans. That was down from 7. There's 7 last term, down to 6. One of our members didn't win at re-election time, so it's back down to a very small minority in the Senate. And in the House, even 160 members of the House of Representatives. There's 130 some odd Democrats. The rest are Republicans. So in Massachusetts, at least, we are the political minority, and sometimes it's hard to get things done. I'd like to tell you that one of the ways I've been able to get things done as a senator, at least, is by working with my colleagues, both locally and also in Boston, on both sides of the aisle. I mean, we have a reputation here in Western Massachusetts of all of us elected officials working really well together because there's so few of us, not in party basis, but compared to Boston, right? So when you represent the 4 western counties of Massachusetts, you have the same number of legislators as the city of Boston has by itself. So we kind of work well together because we have to. We put the partisan differences aside whenever we can. I mean, sometimes there's partisan debates that you have, but in the most part, your job is to represent your people in your district against an overwhelming force of people in the eastern part of the state who may not understand how things are here. So what do? You meet them, you work with them, you try to explain how things are, you make it irrelevant so they understand how what we do in Boston affects businesses, not-for-profits, schools, and individuals out here in Western Massachusetts. I tell the stories of the people that I represent. I try to work well with my friends, really, the people that I work with, and ultimately, most of the time, I can be successful. Not always with every vote, but a lot of times with earmarks I might want to put into the budget, or bills that I might want to get through, things that I might be able to do with working with my fellow representatives and senators out here. So I have no complaints. I've been really grateful with the ability to do things. And I know that there's people watch CNN or they watch the news and they think all we do in politics is fight with each other. And off camera, we had a little tiff, and I said earlier, I didn't want to be held responsible for what was going on in Washington, D.C. I mentioned that before with President Trump or anything else, because that's not the style of politics that we practice in Massachusetts. I think our Senate and our legislature in general will tell you that we're kind of proud of the fact that Republicans and Democrats, while maybe not agreeing on a lot of party things or policy things, do work really well together. And the biggest thing is that we don't stop talking. We don't stop communicating. Unlike our friends in Washington, we actually speak to each other. We go out to dinner with each other. We have fun with each other a lot, actually, which makes it a great job. But the goal is to remember that at the end of the day, your job is to represent the people home, and those people are Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. Some of them have never voted. Some of them vote all the time. Doesn't even matter. Your job is just to represent them to the best of your ability.
If I could follow up, Senator, it seems that the Republicans in Massachusetts are more, they're like yourself, like Charlie Baker, like Mitt Romney, people who are, Mitt Romney famously got the health care approved here. Yeah,
we had it here before any place else in the country.
Right, and also and worked with Democrats.
And he did that by working with Senator Kennedy. Yeah, Mitt and Ted Kennedy worked together on that bill.
Is the divide in Massachusetts, it's not so much about political ideology, but about geography? You have the eastern part of the state versus the western part of the state?
I feel like it. And if you live at Cape Cod, you feel the same way about Boston. Or if you live in, even if you live in Worcester, you feel like Boston is all about Boston. And
is that true? Is Boston all about Boston?
Anybody from Boston watching this? Yeah, I think they are. And how can they not be? They have the bulk of the population. That's where most of the businesses, the economic center of our state is. That's where most of the people live. I get it. Their job is to look out for themselves. And that's why the rest of us from all the other regions of Massachusetts, North Shore, Cape Cod, Worcester, and of course our friends in the Berkshires who feel even more removed from Boston than we do in Western Mass, yeah, they all feel like it's us against them. It isn't really, but it is a little chip we have on our shoulder that we have to remind our friends who, live in the capital or work in the capital that, not all of us have the tea. Not all of us have, we're not all served by, a great example is we're not all served by the commuter rail, and we don't always have the options that they have for jobs and things like that. So it is a constant battle on the part of us from Western Massachusetts to remind our friends to look out for us.
And in this time, if just one follow-up question to that, because we live in such divisive times, how would you characterize the Republican Party of Massachusetts?
Well, actually, it's good question. We're about to start a new chapter because the Republican Party just elected a new chairman who was a former state representative named Jim Lyons from Andover. Jim got beat as a state representative in the last race last November. So he was out of a job. He was no longer a state representative. But the party, the state committee men and women in the Republican Party elected him to be the new chair. So Jim will be our new chairman as the head of the party. I'm not sure what direction he would seek to take the party. I'm encouraged because I know Jim to be a gentleman, a partisan, but a good gentleman who is a lot of fun to work with and also knows what it's like to be an elected official. So from my point of view, that's a good thing for me because he knows what it's like to have to get elected in Massachusetts as a Republican. And that's a different thing than trying to get elected as a Republican in Texas or someplace else, Florida, for example. I think also Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Politicos set an example, sort of set a model for how other politicians should be, not even Republicans, just all politicians. Karen and Charlie are both really approachable, really likable. They're willing to do things that I think politicians in the past weren't even willing to do. And they go anywhere, they talk to anybody. Karen's been in all 351 cities in Massachusetts. I think that's amazing. And very rare that any statewide elected official would be able to go to every one of the communities in our state. I'm very impressed by that. And I'm really glad that they've come to our communities out here. In previous iterations, it's been hard to get the governor, lieutenant governor, or statewide candidates, or even statewide office holders to come to Holyoke or to come to Southwick or Westfield or something like that. It's hard to get them to come out here, and this administration comes out all the time to every place. So I don't know how they ever get home, quite frankly, but I'm glad they're out here.
Manuel, you had a question.
Yes. Saludo, Dr. Senator Donaldson.
Gracias.
I just want to know, for those persons who are not familiar with you, what are your political priorities for the next 2 years?
Thank you. So sort of consistently from the beginning, I ran as a state representative candidate 15, 16 years ago from Westfield with my goal to be a voice for Western Mass, for my district and for the people who lived out here. I'm interested in education. I was a graduate of Westfield Public Schools and Westfield State College, so I went to Westfield, a university at the time. From here in Western Mass, I have a 7-year-old son, so I'm very, very interested in quality of life issues for children, as well as education. I was not a veteran, but I had a lot of friends who were, and of course, representing my area of the state, we have the 104th Fighter Wing at Barnes Airport, and we have Westover, and we have countless military bases and barracks around. So I wanted to look out for veterans' causes, because I just feel very strongly about what they do for our country and for our region. I guess I sort of wanted to be, instead of having specific issues that I wanted to fight for, I wanted to be more of that big guy that kind of speaks up for the little guy out here in Western Mass, who listens to what his constituents tell him are important to them, and then to carry that message down to the eastern part of the state. So I just wanted to be accessible to the people that I represent. They can come up and approach me and talk to me. I want to make sure that there was no barrier between me and the people that I represented. And I just wanted to let people know that I'm willing to listen and hopefully learn about what it is that's key to them. So living in Westfield and representing that city for a while in the House was very different from then representing the Senate district. I went from one city to having 11. And I went from representing a city and then going into the Senate, where I have 5 cities. So you have Holyoke and Chicopee and Westfield and Easthampton and Agawam, but you also have a lot of small towns. I have Montgomery and Tolland, and Russell and Southampton, Southwick. You have a lot of small communities that have different needs. So on any given day, I could be talking about, published transportation infrastructure, or building a new school building, or fixing a bridge, Westfield or Agawam or someplace like that.
Or farming.
And then you could also have farming. Exactly. You could have farming. You could have energy. You could have solar panels, or farmers interested in solar panels. How do you provide energy for your farm? You put solar panels on your barn. So stuff I never knew anything about is now what I'm being asked to help with.
How much time do you spend on the road?
A lot.
In your district?
Yeah. So a lot of people think, living out in Western Mass, you spend most of your time going back and forth from Boston to Westfield and back. And that's true. But I also spend a lot of time driving around throughout the district. And it's funny because where my district is in Westfield, or my district office, it's sort of 45 minutes from there to almost any place in my district. So I know if I have to go to something in Agawam, it's about 45 minutes to get there, or somewhere up in Southwick or Granville or Tolland, it's 45 minutes to get there. Tolland's a little farther. But if I have to go to Westfield, or I have to go to Easthampton from Westfield, again, 45 minutes. So I'm sort of in the center, and it's like a spoke on a wheel. I can kind of go from there and get most places where I need to be.
Do you get to all the different cities and towns in your district regularly?
So that's one of the things I pride myself on. From the beginning, I was a kind of a rural guy. So, where I live in Westfield is actually, I live in Westfield, but my backyard is in the town of Russell. So I pay taxes in both communities. And
wow. As a Republican, that must really hurt.
No, I like the Russell tax rates. Okay. It's a lot cheaper. So I wanted to make sure that the smaller towns didn't feel like they were getting forgotten to the bigger cities, And listen, I can spend all my time in Holyoke, or all my time in Westfield, or all my time in Chicopee. There's always something going on every day, all the time. And that's not always the case with the smaller towns. But I want to make sure that they know that, I'm willing to come to the communities to do anything, whether it's a spaghetti supper at the firehouse, or something going on in one of the churches, or visiting a library for a read aloud program, whatever it is. I don't mind going. I like to go, and I'm not just going to spend time in the cities. I also want to go to those small towns. Also, when I'm doing things in the budget, I've tried to make sure that. Because I can do more through the state budget than I can through legislation. So I've often tried with the state budget to steer money to like senior centers and to libraries and stuff that I like, and priorities in my district, but that I also support. I do that to make sure that the small towns get benefit as well as the big towns. So
we're going to take a small break. We're going to hear about the Holyoke STEM Academy, and then we're going to come back with Senator Don Humason.
Isabel, Beth Marie, Angie, and myself. We created this mural describing our school, and it represents our school. So like when people come in, they kind of like just see it and get a view of what we do.
Supervisors passed a proposal to outlaw plastic straws and cinders in the city.
Today we had 2 problems, and we were working in groups of probably 6, and each group had 1 problem with 2 parts. And it was really fun to be able to collaborate with my friends and see their opinion on the problems.
So Holyoke STEM Academy is committed to being a high-performing, innovative, and responsive school where students become effective communicators, resilient problem solvers, passionate learners, and global citizens so that they can be successful in high school, college, and beyond.
The teachers work really hard to make sure that it's a place that you want to be and you want to come to school every day, and that everything you're learning is so interesting and done in a good way where you, even if you are struggling with a specific topic, you'll understand it in some way because they give you multiple ways to solve a problem instead of just giving you one clear way.
We like the school. It's pretty, it's big, and there's everything we wanted in a school.
I would like to tell all my friends that this school is not just going to let you stand on your own and work hard on your own, that they will love you and they'll help you and they'll stick by you so that you can work hard alone and get your great education.
Our curriculum engages students in science throughout all content areas. So they engage in science by reading informational text in ELA. They engage in it through their writing class and social studies, looking at science effects on history. They also have it in science classes. We have a Project Lead the Way program in grades 6th, 7th, and 8th, in which we engage students in hands-on real-life problem solving. STEM is the fastest growing sector for our youth. And many of the jobs and fields that they will enter college or enter a career in haven't even been thought of. And so we are really trying to enhance their 21st century learning skills by building a solid foundation now in middle school, which will allow them to become productive citizens when they enter those careers that haven't yet been created, especially in technology.
It's really important because there's so many jobs with opportunities to use your STEM. There's so many jobs involved math and science and technology because everything is surrounding technology nowadays. And to learn about it at such a young age, it's so important because it builds a foundation for you to go on to later careers and improve your education.
I love my experience here and to give us more responsibility so that we can be shown the way that to work with others.
Strings go from under and over, and then it attaches to this one at the bottom that you yank on. It made me learn how unique the human hand is.
STEM Week, I personally really enjoy it because I've always loved science, and it's using real life situations that we are going to have to face in the real world, but putting it in a fun scientific way where we're able to discover and do different experiments to try and figure out how we would actually live on the moon, or how we need to code to learn program robots.
I like that at the end of STEM Week that the parents can come in and see everything we did. For example, the lunar colony, we got to build a lunar colony.
We believe in really creating kids that are effective communicators, really have a resiliency and a passion for learning, and can be effective citizens when they leave here, not only in high school, but also beyond us.
We're back with Senator Don Humason. With me again is Michael Plaisance and Manuel Frau Ramos. We're talking about politics. And more specifically, Senator, when do you decide, or how do you decide when to be a leader on an issue and when to follow what your constituents want?
A great question, because I don't know if this makes me unusual or just makes me practical or what, but I have no problem with following people. I've done that really my entire life in my political career because I was a legislative aide. And I was a legislative aide, I was an assistant to Mike Knapik when he was a state representative, and later on when he became a state senator for this district. And then for different secretaries of Health and Human Services, I was an assistant to them. I don't mind following people that are really smart and know what they're doing. And around here, I have a district where I really admire the mayors that I work with and the state representatives in my district. So, for example, here in Holyoke, Aaron Vega is the state representative. He lives here. He's in this community every day of his life. I'm the outsider. I get that. So my job is to support him in most things that he does for the city. I have no problem following Aaron or following Mayor Morse, for example, or in Chicopee following Mayor Koss or following Representative Wagner. I just look at what they're doing, and if it's something they need my help with, and I think it's good for the people that we represent, and it usually is, I have no problem following. Where you become a leader, I have different things that I'm interested in. I happen to be the chairman of the Aviation Caucus in the legislature. It's just a group of representatives that look out for districts that have airports and aviation-related businesses. Mm-hmm. I became a leader in that because I represented a district that had an airport, and they were looking for someone who wanted to join the caucus, and I did, and then gradually became the leader of the caucus. I just became Senate chairman of the boating caucus. Even though I'm from Western Massachusetts, about as far from the ocean as you can get, I just received Legislator of the Year for the Marine Trades Association in the boating caucus for doing boating things that lead to, or that help me to get some stuff done in the budget for workforce training for people in the boating industry. So you become a leader sort of where you're interested in something and maybe nobody else is, or you're interested in something and you pick up the ball and run with it and people follow you. I don't know. I think the job of a legislator, especially where we are meant to be more of a collaborative body, is you may not have any specific leaders, but you have a lot of people who are willing to work with each other collaboratively in a team. Maybe that's the best way to look at it, especially the day after the Super Bowl. It's helpful to do things as a team. You get things done, I think, a lot better if you do that as a team than if there's a bunch of leaders and followers.
What does being in a caucus mean? Is that an official
kind
of title, or is it informal?
Thanks, Mike. It's a good point. A caucus is literally just a group of like-minded people. So you have a Democratic caucus, a Republican caucus, a House caucus, a Senate caucus, a caucus of we have a Gateway Cities caucus of members who represent gateway cities. Mm-hmm. We have a public higher education caucus for those of us who represent colleges like Westfield State or Holyoke Community College. There's as many caucuses as you can imagine. Boating caucus, aviation caucus. It's just a group, really. It's a term for an informal group of legislators who, may be interested in that topic.
And what do you do when you get together? Do you have coffee or?
Sometimes. Those are the fun caucuses when you actually get food. No, you basically talk. It's really about finding out what your priorities are and how you can affect them either through legislation or through earmarks in the budget or something like that.
Also, potential co-sponsor.
Yeah, you're trying to talk about what are your action items and what can you do? Is it, is there going to be a day on the Hill where you're going to help to educate your colleagues about a particular issue? Mm-hmm. Who are you going to invite as a speaker or speakers? Who are you going to bring in as presenters? Or if there's something coming up on the floor, is there who will speak on the issue? What kind of debate will there be? That kind of thing. It can be a topic of as broad a topic as you can imagine.
Okay.
Senator, as a former educator, I love the topic of education. What is your position about charter school and versus regular?
Yeah, well,
public school.
So it's a little controversial. I sort of have a position similar to Governor Baker's in that I support charter schools in certain communities. Some of them are very effective and very helpful to the parents and especially the children mm-hmm. who may be in positions where they haven't had they don't have the best alternatives for education. And as I said earlier, also a graduate myself of public higher ed and public education in Westfield. So I support public schools too, because I know that is where the bulk of educating in any community takes place. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to talk about that we in the legislature are going to be doing mm-hmm. is we're working on a promise bill, both the Senate and the House. The Senate passed it last year, mm-hmm. but the House is going to catch up to us, I think, this year, about actually funding public education.
So.
Yeah, and looking at things like the charter school reimbursement and all the other things that we
mm-hmm.
haven't done well in Boston about areas that are underfunded. So that is one of the things that's on, I would say, the governor's priority list and both the House and Senate this year.
Promise education is K-12.
K through 12,
okay.
Yes, yeah.
No higher education.
Not in that bill.
Okay.
No, not in the Promise bill. There's a group called Phenom that supports public higher education and advocates for college on Beacon Hill as well.
Because according to the Massachusetts Teacher Association, the Commonwealth had the fastest growing public college costs and the second fastest growing in student debt in the nation. That's true?
I don't know if it's true. I don't doubt it. It seems right. It's pretty expensive. In Massachusetts, we had the first colleges, right? We had Harvard, we had places like that. And so we're known for being a state where higher education is an industry. We have a lot of people that go to college here and they come out highly educated, but it's not always public higher ed, it's private higher ed as well. What used to be the case was that if you went to schools like Holyoke Community or STCC or Westfield State, you got a good education at a pretty reasonable cost that anybody could afford. The problem is, as days go on, those education costs get higher and higher to the point where a lot of people can't afford it anymore.
Senator, excuse me, before on that line, Holyoke Community College, for instance, I think it gets 60% of its budget from the state. It used to get much more. Why is that number going down for public education, higher education?
It's a good question because the budget is getting bigger each year. We have a budget that's over $45 billion. I think it's because there's more things that the state funds. If you ask anybody on the street, what are the priorities of what government should do? Education's got to be up there. I mean, people talk about public safety and veterans and seniors and things like that, but education's always very high. The trouble is we have such a big pot and so many pieces, I guess a big pie rather than a pot, but a big pie and so many slices. In the old days, maybe if it was just a few slices like education and public safety, more money could go to those spaces, those pieces of the pie. But I think the more we try to bite off and do in Boston, the less money there is for each of those areas. So
the biggest part of that pie is healthcare.
Yeah, it is.
It's healthcare, like we were talking before,
pensions,
healthcare is like its own nation state. It's like 40-something% of the state budget.
The Executive Office of Health and Human Services, which oversees Medicaid and all the health and human service agencies, is easily a half of the state budget, $20 billion plus. And so healthcare is a huge cost, and it's also one that we have a hard time, we as government has a hard time regulating. We have a hard time keeping the costs down because insurance companies, hospitals, doctors' offices, they all control things that we in government can't control. And so we talked about an education bill coming up this year. There's likely to be another higher ed cost containment bill of some kind. In fact, I know we got really close during the last session, and in the final days, it didn't pass a bill that would have benefited us here with Holyoke Medical Center. I represent Holyoke Medical Center on one hand, and on the other hand, I have Bay State Medical with Noble Hospital. So you have like a huge healthcare industry organization versus a smaller healthcare organization. All of them part of the same puzzle of providing healthcare to our constituents, but from a very different in size, right? So that's likely to be another thing that we do, or that we try to do this session, is address the ever-growing costs of providing healthcare to people.
Can anything be done about it? Is Massachusetts and every other state doomed to simply seeing costs rise every year?
Yeah, what we try to do is limit the rise of those costs. I don't know, I'm sure there are ways of bringing costs down, but we have been in a position where we're trying to limit the increase each year in, your healthcare costs through your premiums and through your co-pays and your deductibles and things like that. Transparency in medicine is really important. That's a big thing that's coming from the federal government on down. We're trying to see that instituted here locally as well across the Commonwealth.
You're referring to how much it costs to have a procedure at a hospital?
Yeah, so that you can see, for example, if I choose as a consumer, I need to get a procedure done, do I choose this hospital or this hospital? And if they have the same procedure listed, but this hospital is much more expensive than this one, why would I choose to go here when I could take my health insurance dollars here? And if the quality outcomes are the same, if readmissions to the hospital are low, if the I'm liable to get better in, 3 to 6 weeks as opposed to, 4 to 5 weeks. As long as they're close, why wouldn't you pick the place that was cheaper?
Senator, to Mike's point, though, is the industry itself, the healthcare industry, is not going to regulate itself and lower costs. Because as we know, I think it's the head of the Blue Cross Blue Shield, the CEO makes millions of dollars a year. He's not going to say, I willingly will go down to $1 million a year salary. And like that across the board. Hospitals, health insurers. So then how does the government help the citizens afford good health care, if not by monitoring, okay, what are the costs? How can we reduce them? Earlier, you did mention that there's some things that the government doesn't have control over.
Yeah. Although in many ways, the government is, in most cases, the largest customer of healthcare too, through our retirees, through our workers. We are, as a group, have sort of the biggest number of people insured, or the biggest number of people that are treated in the healthcare industry. So we do control it that way.
Doesn't that give you the upper hand then?
Well, it does, and that's sort of where we use it when we can. It's funny because you don't want to intrude too much into an industry, because when you do, I guess as government, you have unintended consequences. You trigger, you try to control costs here, and something over here pops up. But if you don't act at all, then, as you said, right, costs rise, and they rise precipitously. So the challenge every year, and we've been doing this for a long time, is trying to find that balance between how much you do and how little you do, and what is the right outcome, right? And I know that smarter people than me are working on this daily, including, thankfully, somebody like Governor Baker, who comes from a health insurance background and health background in general. He has a much better understanding of healthcare than I think a lot of us do, and I'd like to think that his goal for our state is that we continue to have excellent healthcare in Massachusetts, but also healthcare that we can all afford, that all of us can afford, whether we have health insurance or not. The good news is, because of Romney-Kennedy care and now Obamacare, we're all insured. There's very, very small percentage of people in Massachusetts that don't have health insurance. We have among the highest in the country who are insured. So the access to healthcare is there, but it's still the cost, and the cost and the outcome. I don't want to pay for bad health care. I want good health care that I know will take care of me or my son, my wife, my family, that kind of thing, and that will do the job of keeping me healthy, repairing me when I'm broken, fixing me when I'm sick, that kind of thing. Okay. In that regard, we're in pretty good shape here in Massachusetts because we have great quality of health care. It's the cost that we have to, like anything else, the cost of anything we have to control before it gets too out of hand.
The state budget is $45 billion. Yeah. Is that an adequate budget? Can it be cut? One of the things we were talking about earlier is, I used to cover the city of Springfield. Tim Rook in Springfield used to make a proposal every year that would get voted down, but he would say, all right, anybody who's going to propose a spending measure must in tandem propose how you would fund that. Like if you're going to propose a fire truck, what are you going to cut in the budget, or where are you going to get the money to fund that? Is cutting the budget, should there be more emphasis on budget cutting? I mean, $45 billion is a lot of money. And the budget has grown almost $1 billion every year, right? And so you ask yourself, how can you sustain $1 billion increase each year? It has been said that a budget is simply a list of priorities for the government, right? So it is not possible to have everything be your priority. If we talk about education and healthcare and maybe transportation or public safety being our priority, then they should be priorities and they should be funded in the budget. So it's incumbent upon us, I think, to look and say, okay, what areas aren't the priority anymore? Or what areas of a budget that we fund, say, 10 years ago that aren't necessary anymore, or that aren't as important, or, with the interests of our constituents changing, what do we unfund so that we can fund here? Because you can't always keep going back and going, well, everything we do is a priority, and if we're going to pay for anything else, we have to raise taxes every time to do that. $45 billion is a lot of money. You should be able to find within that $45 billion money to pay for the priorities that you have. So I think, we should. In fact, we have the same rule in the Senate, the same rule that was proposed, that if you're going to increase the budget somewhere, you also have to propose where you're going to decrease it.
That rule didn't pass, but it's still out there on our, in our minds that you can't always increase something. Ultimately it becomes unsustainable, unaffordable. People you literally can't pay for that anymore. So we should be looking at defunding parts, and not defunding in a negative way, but just looking and say, okay, this program is past its date. We're not using it anymore. This is something we don't do. We've been able to, in a good way, I guess, look at closing offices and things like that that used to serve a lot of people, and now the economy is going really well. We're serving fewer people. We don't need to have as many offices open. We don't need to have as many programs because things are going better in our state. The unemployment rate is so much lower. People are working, that kind of thing. That's what you want to see. And so if you have that and it's going well, you don't need to continually pump money into the social service net because it's not being used as much. That being said, that's a very small portion of the budget. We have to continually go back and say, if we're going to spend here, because that's a priority, what can we look at that isn't a priority? And that's just normal budgeting. You do the same thing at home when you're trying to figure out what you're going to pay for this week or this month. Obviously, rent is important, or your mortgage is important, or your food budget, or your heat budget. Those are all important. Are you going to go to the movies? Are you going to buy a new car? Are you going to do this, that, and the other thing?
The key difference being politics, though. As you said,
Well, that's right.
A household is going to
Yeah.
take on an expense that's going to come from somewhere. Something's probably going to have to suffer. In a political environment, certain people favor certain things and certain people don't favor those things, and it's how you get it done, which leads us to the question of, does anything get done? Why does the budget have to keep getting?
Why does it have to keep growing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's because costs go up, but other times because, we find other priorities that we want to pay for. You're right. It's harder, I think, in a political atmosphere sometimes because what you think is important in maybe your part of the state may not be as important to me in my part of the state. But in order for me to get something in my state, my part of the state that I want to get funded, I have to allow you to fund your thing. So we're all doing that. I could say, for example, that out here in Western Mass, people don't care about the ferry to the islands. They don't care. We don't need to fund ferries. In fact, none of us in Western Mass should fund a ferry. But if I want, my PVTA funded, I need to have, ferries funded in Boston and PVTA funded in Western Mass.
Compromising.
So you have to trade off. It's horse trading, really. And so you end up having to say, okay, you have your thing and fund that, but I need to have my thing because it's important to the people that I represent.
Speaking of ferries, transportation.
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it so hard to get a rail line between Western Massachusetts and Boston? Commuter rail line, so people can live here, work in Worcester, or work in Boston, vice versa?
I would say it's not hard. It is just, we are at the point of trying to decide what is the issue about doing that. There's already a rail line from Worcester to Boston for commuters. There's already a rail line from Western Mass to Eastern Mass for freight. We can't add to that line because it's sort of congested. So where are we in the process? Well, there was a group of legislators led by Senator Eric Lesser here in Western Massachusetts. I was a co-sponsor of the legislation that passed, actually passed and vetoed and now is in place, that is requiring the Mass Department of Transportation to do the study, probably about 2 years it's going to take to do the study of what is the cost of bringing EastWest Rail from Western Mass to Worcester and Worcester to Boston, right? And it is simple things like there's only this much land and there's already a railroad track there. Where are you going to put the new track? Well, you have to buy this land. Okay. There's houses there. Okay. And they belong to somebody else. And those people don't want rails running through their living room. So you have to buy that land. How much is that going to cost? How much is it going to cost to move those people someplace else? How much is it going to be to build and maintain the rail? How many stops will there be? If there's too many stops, it's no longer a fast rail, and nobody's going to take it if it takes you 4 hours to get from here to Boston. So there's a lot of considerations. How much will the government have to subsidize each ticket so that we can afford to buy it? If you can buy a rail ticket from Springfield to Boston, but it's $300, you're probably not going to pay for it, right? So it's all those things that have to be looked at before you just, boom, open up a new train line. We also have the issue out here in Holyoke, for example, of the opportunity to do north-south rail, right, from New York City all the way up into Vermont and Canada, all the way north. We have a train platform that with one stop a day that we really like to expand. How do we expand it? Well, you have to make sure that people are using it so that we can afford, that we can justify expanding it. But people aren't going to use it if there's just one stop a day. We have to work at making it more, what's the right word, convenient for people, so that you might want to leave in the morning and come back in the afternoon. All those things have to be considered, again, by somebody, by the state DOT or by the legislature or by somebody, but those are the things that have to be, the questions that have to be asked and answered before you can justify spending the billions of dollars of infrastructure that need to be spent. The last time the state poured out that much money, we got the big dig in Boston, and a lot of us in the state would say it wasn't worth it. A lot of people would say that it was. If you're a Western Mass guy, you probably have a harder time saying that $18 billion expenditure was worth it, because you don't get the benefit of it every day driving through the city of Boston in the tunnels and those kind of things. But if you live out there, you might say it was worth it. So before we do that here in Western Mass, we have to really decide, what the issues are that need to be answered and how much that will be.
Just one last question, unless any of you have a question. When you, as a lawmaker, as a senator, do you find yourself, you're working with other Massachusetts lawmakers. Sometimes you have to work then with the federal lawmakers, our senators, our Congress people. What are your relationships like with them, with our senators and our Congress people? Is it also amicable?
Yeah, so in my Senate district is entirely in the district of Congressman Richie Neal. So I work a lot with Representative Neal and his office and his staff. I see him a lot because he's in my district and talking to my constituents. He was just taught a class at Westfield High School 2 weeks ago. Of course, now he's going to be very busy in Washington as chair of the Ways and Means Committee. So he's going to be spending a lot of time, at the Capitol doing his job. But his position, I think, is good for us here in Western Mass, because we've got somebody who's highly placed who can help, within legally and of course within rights, to steer funding back to our region. John Olver, when he was the congressman for the 1st District, did the same thing, and did a lot for me, for example, in my district with funding improvements to Barnes Airport, for example, because of the 104th Fighter Wing. So they looked out for their districts from the federal level on down, just like I try to do from the state level on down. And that's good for us.
And across party lines.
And across party lines, because they know they represent Republicans and Democrats, right? So you kind of take care of, try to take care of everybody.
I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you very much, Senator Don Humason.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mike Plaisance. And thank you, Manuel Frau Ramos. This has been another episode with one of our elected leaders. We'll come back with another elected leader. Until then, take care, everybody.